This is the Fujifilm GFX100RF, and after a month of shooting with it, I can confidently say it might be the most beautiful, capable, and slightly frustrating camera that I've ever used, and yet I can't stop thinking about it.
What's wrong with you?
And that's because in a world where every new camera seems to boast the same kind of AI tricks and overwhelmingly panders to the video-first mentality of 2025, this camera feels different. It's like a love letter to photography. So what exactly makes this camera so unique? And after all of the new camera hype has finally worn off, is this really something that's worth buying, or is it just a fad that will fizzle out over time? Well, that's exactly what I was desperate to find out as soon as I heard that this camera was hitting the shelves. And unfortunately, I wasn't lucky enough to have been selected to join this year's Fujifilm Summit in Prague to try this camera out pre-launch, but Fujifilm came in clutch and were kind enough to lend me this copy for a whole month so that I could really try it out long term. Though I am now also slightly cursing the fact that I have to give this back to them in a few days. I wonder if I fled back to the UK. Do you think they could actually find me? Anyway, let's start by stating the obvious. This thing is stunning. It looks like somebody at a Fujifilm lab took the DNA of the X100VI and just merged it with the GFX100S. Then they shaved off every unnecessary curve and detail until all that remained was unfiltered camera porn. It's sleek, surprisingly compact, and relatively lightweight because this thing comes in at just 735 grams or around 1.62 pounds. And given that this is a medium format camera, that is very impressive alone. Yes, that's right. Inside this camera, there lives a 102 megapixel backside illuminated medium format sensor, meaning that this is arguably one of the most powerful compact cameras we've seen to date. I mean, granted, it's certainly not pocketable, but after weeks of shooting with it, not once have I felt that this was a burden to carry around with me. The button layout is classic Fuji. It's retro inspired, beautifully tactile, and staying true to the idea of full manual dials and buttons. On the top, we have two command dials, an exposure compensation dial, and the same shutter speed / ISO dial design that we've seen on the X Pro and X100 cameras, where you kind of have to lift and spin the dial to adjust the ISO. There are also these two new, rather unique additions, but we'll talk about those a little bit later. Now, one thing that I think Fujifilm has gotten totally right with this camera design is that they've included a pull-out tiltable screen that also sits completely flush with the back of the camera when it's not in use. Not only is this more than enough for shooting from the hip, but it also feels way more in keeping with the photography first mentality. Don't get me wrong, a fully articulated screen is great for video work, but for photography, I sometimes feel that kind of design just cheapens the experience, but maybe that's just me being picky. Now, whilst the build quality is exceptional with its high quality machined metal design, I do still have a few nitpicks. Firstly, the on-off switch is just a little bit too easy to turn on and off by accident. The amount of times that I've pulled this out of my camera bag to find that it's been switched on for the entire car journey, you wouldn't believe. Then you may have also spotted that there's no hybrid optical viewfinder option like we've seen on the X Pro or X100 series, just a dedicated EVF. And whilst this doesn't bother me personally, I'm sure this will put off some rangefinder enthusiasts and does feel slightly ironic given that the RF in its name is actually short for rangefinder.
Isn't it ironic?
That said, the EVF is incredibly high quality and an absolute joy to use when composing shots, so you can't feel all that hard done by. Now, my final bone of contention is that whilst most of the buttons and dials are perfectly placed, I have to admit that the front command dial feels a little bit awkward to reach and locate with just touch alone. Now, when this camera first arrived, I found myself often flicking this switch, which is just beneath it, by accident, and even after my muscle memory was well and truly ingrained into my brain, I still kept hitting the wrong switch from time to time. Now, maybe that's just because I'm completely incompetent, or perhaps some habits die hard. Who knows? But either way, that is about all that I have to whinge about with this camera, and to be honest, none of the things I just listed there I would even remotely consider as being deal breakers. So what about the performance of this camera, starting with the autofocus? Well, it's Fujifilm, so you probably kind of already know what to expect. There really isn't anything groundbreaking here, but it has inherited the same phase detect AF system found in other more recent Fujifilm bodies. And whilst it may not be Sony level of sticky, it's more than enough for most types of shooting. The eye detection is very solid and subject tracking holds up pretty well too. So for a medium format body, it's remarkably responsive. Now, you're obviously not going to be using this for high-speed sports or wildlife photography, but then that's not the point of this camera. It's been designed as a portrait, street, travel, documentary beast, and for that type of thing, it is more than capable. Now, I know that this is a photography-first camera, but apparently it's almost impossible to make a camera these days that doesn't capture at least some kind of video too, so let's touch on that side of things quickly. Yes, this shoots 4K, 30p, 10-bit 422, and yes, the image quality is great. F-Log will also be a welcome addition for those who want maximum control when color grading in post, and there's even a headphone port, mic jack input, and micro HDMI for hooking up a monitor. But here's the thing, this camera doesn't have any kind of IBIS. Well, by that I mean that there's no sensor shift IBIS, because technically it does at least offer some digital image stabilization in video mode if you're okay with it applying a 1.3 times crop to your footage. Let's be serious, this was never intended to be a sensible choice for filmmakers. Video capture is very much a nice to have feature for creators who want to capture the odd bit of cinematic B-roll now and again, which I think is absolutely the right choice for this type of camera. Because personally, I don't think we need another 8K capturing monster. This one is for the photographers, and in my opinion, it's about time. And on that note, let's get into the real reason why you'd ever consider buying this camera, and that's for stills photography. And to help ensure that I was capturing the best possible results, I was actually aided by my friends over at Zhiyun, who sponsored this episode and kindly hooked me up with a special edition version of their Molus X100 RGB light. Now, I've used the original X100 light before, and personally I really enjoyed using it, but this new version has actually been co-created with an insanely talented cinematographer, photographer, and personal friend of mine, Cam Mackey. And honestly, the flavor he's managed to sprinkle onto this light has absolutely transformed it into a content creator's best friend. I really do mean that. For starters, this thing is smaller than a cheeseburger, yet somehow delivers up to 100 watts of power, supports full RGB color output, and can run off either the mains, PD fast charging, or this dedicated battery grip here, which meant that I could shoot wire-free whilst out on location. Now, throughout the shoot, I actually combined this light with Zhiyun's own mini octabox, which offers 2 layers of diffusion for beautifully soft, flattering light, great for portraits. Plus, it has an attachable honeycomb grid to help you control light spill and add further contrast. Now, I mainly used this as my key light during my shoot, as the room was pretty dark and dingy, but because this is so bright, I was actually able to fill the entire room with light, ensuring that my photos were actually really nicely lit. I also tried out the RGB functionality, turning the light into a red color and positioning it as a hair light. I then balanced the shot out with some window light to illuminate my model, and I was really happy with the results I got. This setup can actually be controlled remotely using Zhiyun's own free app, or by using the rear screen here on the back of the light. Be sure to click the link in the pinned comment below and use the code provided to receive 10% off your purchase if you are interested. Anyway, back to the camera now, and I know that over the past few years we've all become a little bit numb to megapixel counts these days, but this camera is absolutely ridiculous. The amount of detail you can pull out from a single 102 megapixel image is quite frankly absurd. Dynamic range is class leading, the color depth, especially in skin tones, is absolutely beautiful, and as always, I've worked these images up using my own Lightroom presets, which I think paired really nicely with the raw files that this camera produces. And if you happen to agree and you want to try these out for yourself, then be sure to check out the link in the pinned comment below, where I've left a 10% discount code that you can use store-wide. But if you happen to be having a day where the thought of yet more editing work makes you want to have a bath with your toaster, then you can also comfortably rely on Fujifilm's now pretty extensive range of Fujifilm simulation modes, which just look beautiful straight out of the camera. I always have a lot of fun playing around with these modes and using the in-camera settings to make up my own recipes. And these days, the ways in which you can actually modify and tailor tailor these looks in camera to your own style is getting pretty insane. But let's not forget that this is a camera that has a fixed lens on the front. So whilst the sensor is obviously very important, it's only as good as the glass in front of it. So what's the deal here? Well, it has a fixed 35mm f4 lens, and due to the sensor being larger than full frame, this camera has a crop factor of 0.79, giving you roughly a 28mm full frame equivalent field of view. Now, this lens is absolutely tack sharp, even when shooting wide open, but the max aperture of f4 might have already raised a few eyebrows. So here's the deal. In terms of depth of field, because of the larger sensor, this actually behaves more like an f3.2 lens would do on a full frame camera, so the bokeh is a little better than it first sounds. But when it comes to actual light transmission, this is still just an f4 lens, and that will of course matter in low light situations. Add in the fact that there's no IBIS, and yeah, this definitely feels like a daytime camera, unless of course you're prepared to crank the ISO sky high, have this glued to a tripod, or are prepared to use flash. Now, speaking of flash, one piece of good news is that this uses a leaf shutter, and that means that flash can be synced at any shutter speed, providing a lot more flexibility in that area. But there are also other benefits to having a lens like this, the main one being size. This smaller aperture of f4 has allowed Fujifilm to keep this lens pretty small, only helping to make this camera more portable. And for street photographers who tend to prioritize shooting at narrow apertures anyway, this probably won't cause too many issues. Now, for portrait work, this is still a pretty solid choice, provided that you're willing to kick that bokeh addiction for a minute. But personally, I still would have preferred an f2.8 or even f2 lens, even if it meant that the lens had to be made more bulky. But what do you think?
No. He's got a point.
Anyway, I also need to mention that this camera includes a built-in 4-stop ND filter, which can be activated at the click of a button. Which button, you might ask? Well, honestly, take your pick, because this camera has an insane level of customizability too, allowing you to set the camera up just how you like it. Well, almost. You see, there are two dials specifically that can't be altered at all. Now, starting with this one on the back here, this is a dedicated dial that allows you to quickly switch between a variety of different aspect ratios, including 1:1, 3:2, 16:9, or even some slightly weirder options like cinematic 65:24. Honestly, I haven't set this to anything other than 3:2 the whole time, because I much prefer to have the flexibility of cropping in post, but I can totally see the appeal of this for those who are that way inclined. Then there's this little rocker switch on the front, you know, the one that my index finger keeps having a wrestling match with.
Slippery little bastard!
Well, this is used as a digital teleconverter function that essentially emulates different focal lengths, the options being 45mm, 63mm, and 80mm. Now, obviously, this isn't actually changing anything with the lens, but what it is doing is cropping into the massive 102 megapixel sensor to give you tighter fields of view. So the longer the focal length you set, the more cropped in the resulting image will be, and obviously this will impact the final resolution of your shots. Though, even when shooting at the longest setting of 80mm, you're still producing perfectly usable 19.5 megapixel images. Now, one thing to note here is that when shooting in RAW, whilst using this mode, the camera will still record the entire 102 megapixel image. It's not until you open her up into Lightroom afterwards that you'll see that the image is just cropped in automatically for you, so you can actually undo this teleconversion pretty easily if you trigger this mode by accident, something I might have done a few times. So you might be asking at this point, why even bother then? Why not just crop your images afterwards? Well, I think there's two reasons. Number one, if you like to shoot in JPEG only, then the crop will obviously be permanent, which means that you don't need to add any post-production work afterwards, which is certainly helpful. And two, this mode really helps you to compose shots better, as the preview in the viewfinder and on the back of the screen will emulate the desired focal length. Being able to adjust it afterwards in Lightroom should kind of just be seen as a safety net should you want to adjust or undo your decision later. So perhaps at this point you're sat there with a ginormous photography boner, because hell, I certainly am, but unfortunately you might need to prepare to go limp just for a second, because we haven't spoken about the price yet. Are you ready? This Fujifilm GFX100RF retails for just under $4,900.
Off. Seriously?
And medium format or not, that is a lot of money for a camera with a fixed lens, no IBIS, and an f4 aperture. So what else could you get for that kind of money? Well, in the medium format world, you're kind of limited. I mean, there's the Hasselblad X2D, which is a stunning medium format body with IBIS and interchangeable lenses that include a built-in leaf shutter. But that will set you back around $8,200 for the body only, and then you still need the glass, which in the world of Hasselblad, let me tell you, isn't cheap. So when you look at it like that, this GFX actually doesn't feel all that badly priced. Now, alternatively, for around $6,700, you could get the Leica Q3, which is a full-frame compact with a 28mm f1.7 lens, incredible build quality, and solid video features. Sure, it has a smaller 60-megapixel full-frame sensor and is $1,800 more expensive, but it does have a much more versatile lens, slightly smaller frame, and a red dot that's a proven pussy magnet.
Okay, you're an animal. Yes, there we go. You're a tiger. You're Tony the tiger.
So I guess it all depends on where your priorities lie. Now, inevitably, someone is going to ask, why wouldn't I just get the X100VI instead? And to be fair, that's a totally valid question. The X100VI is lighter, much cheaper, has a faster f2 lens, and crucially, it includes IBIS, which obviously makes it far more forgiving in low light or when you need to shoot video handheld. Speaking of which, it also does have more extensive video features and includes that classic hybrid viewfinder, which is like crack for most street photographers. But where the GFX100RF really hits back hard is in the sheer image quality department. That medium format sensor is next level in terms of depth, dynamic range, and resolution. It's kind of like comparing a luxury sedan to a private jet. I mean, both will get you to your destination, but one's doing it with a load more flex. Either way, one thing's for sure, this GFX100RF sits in a really strange space in the camera market. One that Fujifilm has kind of carved for itself without anyone really asking them to. And that alone garners a lot of my respect. So what does this all mean? Is this the best camera Fujifilm has ever made, or just a beautiful oddity? Well, in some ways, yes. To both. It offers a unique shooting experience that no other brand is currently offering at this price point. It's refined, very thoughtful, and despite its flaws, it's incredibly addictive to use. Is it a total game changer? Probably not, but it's certainly very unique. Still, if this is a glimpse into where Fujifilm and medium format cameras are headed, count me in.